During his almost 3 years in office, John Kennedy stated his positions on many issues through his speeches to Congress and the nation. When violence erupted in the South as black students sought admittance to white universities, the president outlined some of his thoughts on civil rights as he presented Congress one of the strongest civil rights bills in the history of the nation.
This nation was founded by men of many nations and backgrounds. It was founded on the principle that all men are created equal, and that the rights of every man are diminished when the rights of one man are threatened. Today we are committed to a worldwide struggle to promote and protect the rights of all who wish to be free. And when Americans are sent to Vietnam or West Berlin, we do not ask for whites only. It ought to be possible, therefore, for American students of any color to attend any public institution they select without having to be backed up by troops. It ought to be possible for American consumers of any color to receive equal service in places of public accommodation, such as hotels and restaurants and theaters and retail stores, without being forced to resort to demonstrations in the street. And it ought to be possible for American citizens of any color to register and to vote in a free election without interference or fear of reprisal. It ought to be possible, in short, for every American to enjoy the privileges of being American without regard to his race or his color. In short, every American ought to have the right to be treated as he would wish to be treated, as one would wish his children to be treated.
In the area of foreign policy, Kennedy was confronted with a Russian ultimatum to withdraw U.S. troops from West Berlin. He went on the nation's airwaves to flatly refuse the communist demand and instead called for a strengthening of America's conventional armed forces in Europe and elsewhere.
We face a challenge in Berlin, but there is also a challenge in Southeast Asia, where the borders are less guarded, the enemy harder to find, and the dangers of communism less apparent to those who have so little. I hear it said that West Berlin is militarily untenable, and so was Bastogne, and so in fact was Stalingrad. Any dangerous spot is tenable if brave men, will make it so. We seek peace, but we shall not surrender. 3 times in my lifetime, our country and Europe have been involved in major wars. In each case, serious misjudgments were made on both sides of the intentions of others, which brought about great devastation. Now, in the thermonuclear age, any misjudgment on either side about the intentions of the other could rain more devastation in several hours than has been wrought in all the wars of human history. I know that sometimes we get impatient. We wish for some immediate action that would end our perils. But I must tell you that there is no quick and easy solution. The communists control over 1 billion people, and they recognize that if we should falter, their success would be imminent. We must look to long days ahead, which, if we are courageous and persevering, can bring us what we all desire.
But perhaps the greatest confrontation President Kennedy faced during his short term in office came on October 22nd, 1962, when the president addressed the nation about the Russian missiles which had been placed near the coast of the United States in Cuba.
Each of these missiles, in short, is capable of striking Washington, D.C., the Panama Canal, Cape Canaveral, Mexico City, or any other city in the southeastern part of the United States, in Central America, or in the Caribbean area. All ships of any kind bound for Cuba, from whatever nation or port, where they're found to contain cargoes of offensive weapons, be turned back. This quarantine will be extended, if needed, to other types of cargo and carriers. It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union. I call upon Chairman Khrushchev to halt and eliminate this clandestine, reckless, and provocative threat to world peace and to stable relations between our two nations.
This announcement of a naval blockade and the implied threat that the United States would bomb and, if necessary, invade Cuba if the missiles were not withdrawn, contained this somber conclusion.
My fellow citizens, let no one doubt that this is a difficult and dangerous effort on which we have set out. No one can foresee precisely what course it will take, or what costs or casualties will be incurred. Many months of sacrifice and self-discipline lie ahead, months in which both our patience and our will be tested, months in which many threats and denunciations will keep us aware of our dangers. But the greatest danger of all would be to do nothing. The path we have chosen for the present is full of hazards, as all paths are. But it is the one most consistent with our character and courage as a nation and our commitments around the world. The cost of freedom is always high, but Americans have always paid it. And one path we shall never choose, and that is the path of surrender or submission. Our goal is not the victory of might, but the vindication of right. Not peace at the expense of freedom, but both peace and freedom here in this hemisphere, and we hope around the world. God willing, that goal will be achieved.
After a great deal of confusion in Moscow and Havana, the Soviet Union finally complied with the major part of President Kennedy's demands. There followed a relaxation of hostilities in the Cold War, and in 1963, the Kennedy administration again concentrated on domestic issues and the upcoming re-election campaign of 1964. There were already several possible Republican opponents: Nelson Rockefeller of New York, George Romney of Michigan, and William Scranton of Pennsylvania, to name just a few. But the name being mentioned the most as early as 1963 was Senator Barry Goldwater of Arizona. At a news conference in Washington that year, Kennedy was asked to respond to some of the charges already being leveled against him by Goldwater.
As I've said before, I think it would be unwise at this time to answer or reply to Senator Goldwater. I'm confident that he'll be making many charges, even more serious than this one, in the coming months. And in addition, he himself has had a busy week selling TVA and giving permission to suggesting that military commanders overseas be permitted to use nuclear weapons, attacking the president of Bolivia while he was here in the United States, involving himself in the Greek election. So I thought that it really would be not fair for me this week to reply to him.
1963 was a period of innocence for the United States. Barbie dolls were the big thing on the market. Women's fashions were not yet bold and daring. In fact, most of the styles of that day were set by the First Lady, Jacqueline Kennedy, and beards were just beginning to make appearances on college campuses. Some of the best-selling books of the day were Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time, and Jessica Mitford's The American Way of Death. Although their records had sold millions in this country, the Beatles had not yet traveled from England to the United States. But with the 1964 presidential elections less than a year away, Kennedy was doing some traveling, including a visit to Texas to try to patch up the differences between two fellow Democrats, Texas Senator Ralph Yarborough and the governor of the Lone Star State, John Connally. There were 5,000 people waiting at the Dallas airport on that warm Friday, November 22nd, 1963. During the ride through Dallas, the president stood up several times to acknowledge the cheers of the crowd. The bulletproof bubble top on the car was down. As the car, which was traveling at about 25 miles an hour, headed toward a long curve that pointed toward a triple underpass on the fringe of downtown Dallas, Mrs. Connally turned to the president and said, "Well, you can't say Dallas isn't friendly today." It was 12:30 Dallas time. A short time later, listeners, as well as to other radio and television stations across the nation, heard the first shocking reports 10 years ago today.
This is an NBC News bulletin. Shots were fired near President Kennedy in Dallas. Here is a report from Robert McNeil, NBC News, with the presidential party in Dallas.
Several shots were fired as President Kennedy's motorcade passed through downtown Dallas. Crowds screamed and lay down on the grass. As the motorcade went by, police broke away and began chasing an unknown gunman across some railroad tracks. It was not known if the shots were aimed at the president. Repeat, it is not known if the shots were aimed at the president. This is Robert McNeil, NBC News in Dallas, Texas.
And here is a flash from the Associated Press in Dallas. The Associated Press reports that the president was seriously wounded. This is not confirmed. This is a flash. Repeat, this is a flash from the Associated Press in Dallas. They report that the president was seriously wounded by an assassin's bullets.
Information is still sketchy at this time. We have just talked with two eyewitnesses, a man and his wife, who were standing near the president's motorcade. They said that a shot rang out from behind them. They thought at first it was a firecracker. Then, according to the eyewitnesses, one woman who was in a hysterical condition told us that the president was hit in the side of the head and fell into his wife Jacqueline's arms.
People screamed and lay down on the grass as the shots were heard as the motorcade went by. Police immediately fanned out over a wide area. A small Negro boy and a white man said they had seen a man with a gun in the window of a building overlooking the road.
Representative Albert Thomas, Democrat of Texas, says he's been informed the president and Governor Connally were both still alive. A Secret Service agent, Clint Hill, said he's dead. As the president...
Mrs. Kennedy, who was sitting beside him in the open car, was not hurt, but the governor of Texas, John Connally, was also reported wounded.
As the president has been given blood transfusions in an attempt to save his life.
It was days before the facts of those few moments were finally pieced together. 3 shots had been fired rapidly, the first hitting the president in the back, the second striking Governor Connally as he turned to look. The third shot pierced the president's head and was apparently the fatal blow. A span of only 5 seconds separated the 3 shots. The president's limp body was cradled in his wife's lap as their limousine sped to Parkland Memorial Hospital in Dallas. But there was nothing the doctors could do, and a short time later, NBC newsman Edwin Newman announced what most people had feared.
Here is a flash from Dallas. 2 priests who were with President Kennedy say he is dead of bullet wounds suffered in the assassination attempt today. I will repeat with the greatest regret this flash. 2 priests who were with President Kennedy say he has died of bullet wounds.
Where were you when you first heard the news? NBC's David Brinkley comments on some of the reactions.
The news came to each at his own place, and each responded in his own way. In New York City, at 5th Avenue and 47th Street, a blind beggar with a transistor radio was surrounded by a crowd of shoppers who ignored his tapping cane to listen to his radio. Housewives, alone, listened and wept alone. Children in school were called to unscheduled assemblies and told the news. In Boston, an audience gathered to hear a concert by the Boston Symphony Orchestra heard this from the conductor, Eric Leinsdorf.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have a press report over the wires. We hope that it is unconfirmed, but we have to doubt it, that the President of the United States has been the victim of an assassination. We will play the funeral march from Beethoven's Third Symphony.
After the president's body had been placed back on the plane that had taken him to Dallas, Vice President Lyndon Johnson took the oath which made him president. He then gave his first executive order. Let's get this plane back to Washington. That evening, at Andrews Air Force Base near the nation's capital, Mrs. Kennedy walked beside her husband's coffin, followed by the new president, who offered only a brief statement as the world watched.
This is a sad time for all people. We have suffered a loss that cannot be weighed. For me, it is a deep personal tragedy. I know that the world shares the sorrow that Mrs. Kennedy and her family bear. I will do my best. That is all I can do. I ask for your help and God's.
Meanwhile, in Dallas, a suspect had been taken into custody. He was identified as 24-year-old Lee Harvey Oswald, a one-time Marine who had defected to the Soviet Union and married a Russian girl. When he returned to the United States, he proclaimed himself the leader of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. He worked at the Texas School Book Depository, a warehouse where the windows overlooked the scene of the shooting. Authorities say he was seen running out of the building, and a description went out. A Dallas policeman, J.D. Tippett, spotted a man fitting the description, but he was shot and died in the street 4 miles from where the president was struck down. A few moments later, just before the death of President Kennedy was formally announced, Oswald was captured in a Dallas theater and taken into custody. He was later asked by newsmen if he was the one who shot the president.
I didn't shoot anybody, sir. I haven't been told what I'm here for. You have a lawyer? No, sir, I don't.
Saturday was a bleak, rainy day as the leaders of the nation paid their respects privately to the late president. On Sunday, just as the first public ceremonies were about to begin in Washington, the nation was shocked once again as another incredible drama unfolded in Dallas. It happened as Oswald was being transferred from his cell in the city jail to the county prison, and those tuned to their radios and television sets were witnesses to the event.
There is Lee Oswald. He's been shot. He's been shot. Lee Oswald has been shot. There's a man with a gun. It's absolute panic here in the basement of Dallas Police Headquarters. The detectives have their guns drawn. Oswald has been shot. There is no question about it. Oswald has been shot. Pandemonium has broken loose here in the basement of Dallas Police Headquarters. How did you see it, Jeff?
I was standing over towards the left. Oswald came out. He had the same look on his face that he always does or has. Suddenly, what sounded like a loud firecracker rang out. He grabbed his side and he said, "Ow!" and fell to the ground.
And I saw the flash right on his black sweater. The flash. Oh yeah. The man had a hat, a dark hat, a brown suit. He was stocky and strong. Came to him and he put the gun right there. I saw the flash over the black sweater.
Lee Harvey Oswald was dead, and a Dallas restaurant owner, Jack Ruby, was charged with murder. But as the nation continued to reel under these bizarre events, funeral services for John Kennedy proceeded in Washington. David Brinkley and Chet Huntley, who covered the services for NBC, recall those next hours.
Washington was beautiful in the midday November sunshine as the escort troops, followed by drummers and the caisson bearing the flag-draped coffin, moved along the route from the White House up Pennsylvania Avenue to Capitol Hill. Then, at the foot of the Capitol steps, the traditional presidential salute. and slowly, the casket was carried up the steps into the Capitol Rotunda. And the line began to form. People waiting to pass. The line stretched back 15 blocks, 20, 30. They waited patiently and then filed past, 4 abreast, all night long, into mid-morning when thousands still waited when the doors were closed.
Monday, and the final scene. The coffin with full military escort from all the armed services retraced the route of the day before, back to the White House, then followed on foot by 220 world leaders. The president's remains were taken to St. Matthew's Cathedral, 8 blocks away. Charles de Gaulle of France, stark in a uniform without decorations, dominated the groups of foreign leaders. Next to him was Queen Frederica of Greece. Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia was there. King Baudouin of Belgium. 220 of them walking in silent and formless lines to the church.
There is an appointed time for everything, and a time for every affair under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot the plant. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to seek and a time to lose. A time to keep and a time to cast away.
Burial was at Arlington Cemetery, on the long slope that reaches out from the Lee Mansion toward Washington and the Lincoln Memorial.
And so, the 35th President of the United States, 46-year-old John Fitzgerald Kennedy, was laid to rest. And with the death of Lee Harvey Oswald, legends began to form as to the events that took place during those 3 days just 10 years ago. The controversy continues to this day. But even as he had begun his days in the White House with words of high expectations, John Kennedy left this earth with words of hope for the future. One evening, less than a month before the tragedy of Dallas, he commented on those hopes.
I look forward to a great future for America. A future in which our country will match its military strength with our moral restraint
its wealth with our wisdom, its power with our purpose. I look forward to an America which will not be afraid of grace and beauty, which will protect the beauty of our natural environment, which will preserve the great old American houses and squares and parks of our national past, and which will build handsome and balanced cities for our future. And I look forward to an America which commands respect throughout the world, not only for its strength, but for its civilization as well. And I look forward to a world which will be safe.
Today, in this moment of new resolve, I would say to all my fellow Americans, let us continue. This is our challenge. Not to hesitate, not to pause, not to turn about and linger over this evil moment, but to continue on our course so that we may fulfill the destiny that history has set for us.
John Kennedy said in his inaugural address of January 20th, 1961, "Let the word go forth from this time and place to friend and foe alike that the torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans." Less than 3 years later, the torch had been passed again. This program, which has featured a look back at the Kennedy years in the White House and the assassination which brought them to an end on this date 10 years ago, has been a public affairs presentation of Jim Wilson speaking. This is McClatchy Broadcasting.